The courtroom was silent on the afternoon of September 12, 2023. Judge Catherine Brennan looked down at the document in front of her, reading the same clause for the third time. Behind her, the oak paneling seemed to press in on the dozen people seated in the gallery. Most were family members. None of them were speaking. The trust, the judge said slowly, is irrevocable. In the second row, a woman named Claire Whitmore closed her eyes. Her brother David shifted in his seat. Their sister, Margaret, stared straight ahead, jaw tight. And in the front row, separated from them by what felt like an ocean, sat a woman in her 60s holding a small white dog. The dog's name was Bella. And according to the will of Eleanor who had died 6 weeks earlier at the age of 78, Bella was now the beneficiary of a trust worth $8.4 million. This is the story of how that happened and what it destroyed. Eleanor Whitmore was not someone you would expect to die wealthy. She grew up in a two-bedroom house in Weston, Connecticut, the daughter of a librarian and a postal worker. She met her husband, Robert Whitmore, in 1967, while working as a secretary at a law firm in Stamford. Robert was an associate there. They married in 1960. Roberta came from money. His family had owned a chain of regional hardware stores across New England, and when his father passed in 1975, Robert inherited a considerable sum, but he was not a flashy man. Neither was Eleanor. They lived modestly. They raised 3 children in a colonial house on 2 acres. They saved carefully. Robert died in 2011, leaving everything to Eleanor. At that point, through careful investments and the appreciation of property, the estate was valued at just under $9 million. Eleanor was 66 years old. She had her health, she had her home, and she had Bella. Bella was a Maltese. Eleanor had adopted her from a shelter in 2013, 2 years after Robert's death. Friends said Eleanor had been quiet and withdrawn after losing her husband. But Bella changed that. She walked Bella every morning. She took her to the park. She talked to her constantly, the way lonely people do when there's no one else listening. The children noticed. They didn't say much about it at first. Claire Whitmore was the oldest, 51, at the time of her mother's death. She worked in finance in Boston, divorced, no children. She visited her mother twice a year, maybe 3 times. David was 40th, a sales director for a pharmaceutical company, married with 2 teenage sons. He lived in New Jersey and called Eleanor every other Sunday. Margaret was the youngest, 45, a teacher in Hartford. She had struggled with anxiety most of her life, and her relationship with her mother had always been complicated. When Eleanor moved Bella into the house, the children made jokes. Their mother had become one of those women, they said, the kind who treated a dog like a child. It was harmless until it wasn't. In 2017, Eleanor revised her will. She did this quietly, without telling anyone. She hired a lawyer named Stephen Caldwell, a trusts and estates attorney who had worked with Robert years earlier. The meetings took place over 6 months. Caldwell would later testify that Eleanor was lucid, deliberate, and fully aware of what she was doing. The new will had a specific structure. Upon Eleanor's death, the house and all liquid assets would be placed into an irrevocable trust. The trustee would be a woman named Diane Harper, a retired veterinarian and longtime friend of Eleanor's. Diane was not family. That was intentional. The purpose of the trust was singular: to provide for the care and maintenance of Bella for the remainder of the dog's natural life. The trust specified that Bella would remain in Eleanor's home. The trust would pay for all veterinary care, food, grooming, and any other needs. Diane Harper would live in the house as Bella's caretaker and would receive a salary of $75,000 per year. Upon Bella's death, any remaining assets would be distributed to animal welfare charities. There was a clause at the end, handwritten by Eleanor, and witnessed by 2 paralegals. To my children, I leave my jewelry and personal effects. They know why. Eleanor signed the will on March 4th, 2018. She did not tell Claire, David, or Margaret. The first stroke happened in January of 2023. Eleanor she was alone in the house when it happened. Walking from the kitchen to the living room, she woke up on the floor with Bella licking her face. She managed to call 911. The paramedics found her conscious but disoriented. She spent 5 days in the hospital. Claire flew in from Boston. David drove up from New Jersey. Margaret came from Hartford. They sat with their mother, asked questions, spoke to doctors. Eleanor was stable but diminished. Her left side was weak. Her speech was slightly slurred. "You can't live alone anymore," Claire told her. Eleanor didn't argue. The children began making plans. There was talk of assisted living. David suggested his mother move in with him and his wife. Margaret offered to take time off work to help. But Eleanor had other ideas. She told them she was staying in the house. Diane Harper, her friend, had agreed to move in and help. The children didn't know Diane well. They had met her a few times over the years, always in the context of Bella. Diane had been Eleanor's veterinarian before she retired. Now she was, apparently, her caretaker. "She's not family," Claire said. "She's my friend," Eleanor replied, and she's agreed. The children didn't push it, not then. Eleanor had always been independent, and truthfully, none of them had the time or capacity to uproot their lives. It was easier to let Diane handle it. Over the next 8 months, Eleanor's health declined. She had a second stroke in May, then a third in July. She became bedridden. Hospice was brought in. Diane managed everything. The children visited, but the visits were strained. Eleanor was often asleep or incoherent. Bella, now 10 years old, lay beside her on the bed constantly. On August 27th, 2023, Eleanor Whitmore died in her sleep. The funeral was small, 20 people, most of them Eleanor's age or older. Claire, David, and Margaret sat in the front row of the chapel. Diane Harper sat 3 rows back. Alone, Bella was not there. Pets were not allowed. After the service, Stephen Caldwell approached the children. He was holding a leather portfolio. He introduced himself as their mother's attorney. He asked if they could meet the following week to discuss the estate. They met on September 5th at Caldwell's office in Stamford. The children arrived separately, but within minutes of each other. They were polite, but tense. Claire had brought a notepad. David kept checking his phone. Marguerite looked exhausted. Caldwell offered condolences, then opened the portfolio. He explained that Eleanor's will was straightforward in structure, but unusual in execution. He began reading. The house, the investment accounts, the savings, everything. All of it placed into an irrevocable trust for the care of Bella. Claire interrupted him. "I'm sorry. What?" Caldwell repeated it. David leaned forward. "The dog?" "The dog," Caldwell confirmed. Margaret started crying. Caldwell continued. "The trustee was Diane Harper. The trust would provide for all of Bella's needs. Upon Bella's death, remaining assets would go to charity. The children would inherit only Eleanor's jewelry and personal belongings." "This is a mistake," Claire said. "It's not," Caldwell replied. He slid a copy of the will across the table. "Your mother executed this in 2018. She was of sound mind. I have the affidavits to prove it." $8 million, David said. "To a dog, 8.4 million, Caldwell corrected. "Approximately." The room went silent. Then Claire stood up. "We're contesting this." Caldwell had expected that. He explained that contesting a will was their right, but it would be difficult. Eleanor had been evaluated by a physician before signing. There were witnesses. The document was airtight. "She was manipulated," Margaret said quietly. "By Diane." "Do you have evidence of that?" Caldwell asked. They didn't, but they would try to find some. If stories like this interest you, subscribing helps you catch the next one. The decision to contest a will is not made lightly. It requires money, time, and a willingness to expose private family matters in a public forum. But for Claire, David, and Margaret Whitmore, there was no other option. They believed their mother had been coerced. They believed Diane Harper had manipulated a sick, elderly woman, and they believed they could prove it. They hired an attorney named Paul Greenberg, a litigator who specialized in estate disputes. Greenberg had handled dozens of will contests over a 30-year career. He knew the law. He also knew the odds. "You need to show undue influence," he told them at their first meeting. "That means proving that Diane Harper exerted pressure on your mother to change her will in a way that benefited Diane." "She gets $75,000 a year," Claire said. "That's a lot of money." "It's a salary for services rendered," Greenberg replied. "That's not unusual in a caretaking arrangement." "She isolated our mother from us," David said. "Did she?" Greenberg asked. "That was the problem. Diane hadn't isolated Eleanor. The children had visited. They had called. Eleanor had chosen to spend more time with Diane, but that was her choice, not Diane's manipulation. Still, Greenberg agreed to take the case. He filed the petition to contest the will on September 20th, 2023. The legal argument was simple. Eleanor Whitmore had lacked testamentary capacity when she signed the will in 2018. She had been unduly influenced by Diane Harper. The will should be declared invalid, and the estate should pass according to Connecticut's intestacy laws, which would divide the assets equally among Eleanor's 3 children. Diane Harper did not respond personally. Stephen Caldwell responded on behalf of the trust. His argument was equally simple. Eleanor had been of sound mind. The will reflected her wishes, and the children's claim was baseless. The case was assigned to Judge Catherine Brennan. The first hearing was scheduled for October. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Paul Greenberg began gathering evidence. He requested medical records. He interviewed Eleanor's doctors. He spoke to neighbors, friends, anyone who had known Eleanor in the years before her death. What he found was not helpful. Eleanor's primary care physician, Dr. Raymond Nash, stated that Eleanor had been mentally sharp up until her first stroke in January 2023. Even after the stroke, she had periods of lucidity. Dr. Nash had no reason to believe she lacked capacity in 2018. Eleanor's neighbors described her as reserved but independent. One woman, Patricia Lindon, who lived 2 houses down, said Eleanor had seemed happier after getting Bella. She smiled more, Patricia sighed. She talked to people. Before that, after Robert died, she was just alone. Greenberg also spoke to Eleanor's former co-workers, women she had kept in touch with after retiring from the law firm in 19. They all said the same thing. Eleanor loved that dog. She talked about Bella constantly. She sent photos. She brought Bella to a reunion once. None of this helped the children's case. But then Greenberg found something. In 2016, a year before Eleanor revised her will, she had spoken to a financial advisor named Thomas Pritchard. Worked at a wealth management firm in Greenwich. Eleanor had gone to him for advice about how to structure her estate. Greenberg called He agreed to an interview. Pritchard remembered the meeting clearly. Eleanor had been concerned about her children. She didn't say why, but she made it clear she didn't want them to inherit everything. She asked about trusts, about charitable giving, about ways to protect assets. Pritchard had given her a few options. One of them was a pet trust. Did she seem uncertain about that decision? Greenberg asked. No, Pritchard said. She seemed relieved. Greenberg pressed him. Did she mention Diane Harper? Not by name, Pritchard said, but she mentioned a friend who took care of Bella when she traveled. She said she trusted that person more than anyone else. That was it. That was all Greenberg had. He knew it wasn't enough. The first hearing took place on October 11th. Judge Brennan listened to both sides. Greenberg argued that the will was the product of undue influence. Caldwell argued that Eleanor had every right to leave her estate to whomever or whatever she wanted. Brennan scheduled a full trial for January. In the months between the hearing and the trial, the family began to fracture. Claire became obsessed with the case. She spent hours combing through her mother's old financial statements, looking for evidence of manipulation. She called Margaret and David almost daily, demanding updates, asking if they had found anything new. David started to doubt. He wondered if their mother had simply made a choice they didn't like. He said as much to Claire during one phone call. She accused him of giving up. Margaret withdrew. She stopped answering calls. She told her husband she couldn't handle it anymore. Meanwhile, Diane Harper continued living in Eleanor's house with Bella. She followed the terms of the trust exactly. Bella saw the vet every month. She ate premium food. She slept on Eleanor's bed. Diane kept detailed records of every expense, every decision. The children hated her for it. In December, Claire drove to the house. She didn't call ahead. She just showed up, knocked on the door, and demanded to see Diane. Diane let her in. They stood in the foyer, the same foyer where Eleanor had fallen during her first stroke. Bella was lying on a cushion near the fireplace. "Why did you do this?" Claire asked. "I didn't do anything," Diane said. "Your mother made a choice. She was sick. She was sick in 2023, Diane said. She made the will in 2018. She was fine." Claire's voice cracked. "She was our mother." Diane's expression softened, but only slightly. No. And I'm sorry you're hurt, but this is what she wanted. You took everything from us." "I didn't take anything," Diane said. "I'm just making sure Bella is cared for. That's all I'm doing." Claire left without another word. The trial began on January 8th, 2024. It lasted 3 days. Greenberg called witnesses. He presented medical records. He argued that Eleanor had been vulnerable after Robert's death, that Diane had inserted herself into Eleanor's life, that the will was the result of manipulation, not genuine intent. Caldwell presented his own witnesses. Doctors, lawyers, friends, all of them testified that Eleanor had been clear, deliberate, and fully capable of making decisions in 2018. On the second day, Greenberg made a critical error. He called Claire to the stand. Caldwell cross-examined her. He asked when she had last visited her mother before Eleanor's first stroke. Claire hesitated. "I don't remember exactly." Caldwell pulled out a calendar. "Your phone records showed you called your mother twice in December 2022. You didn't visit her until she was hospitalized in January." "I was busy," Claire said. "Too busy to see your mother." "I had work," Claire said. "I called her." Caldwell nodded. "And your brother David?" When did he last visit? Claire didn't answer. Caldwell turned to the judge. Your Honor, the children are claiming they were close to their mother, that they cared for her, that they should have been the natural beneficiaries of her estate, but the evidence shows they rarely visited, rarely cared, and rarely engaged with her life. Eleanor Whitmore was not pushing them away. They were simply not there. The courtroom was silent. Greenberg tried to recover. He called David to the stand. David explained that he had a demanding job, that he had 2 sons, that he called his mother as often as he could. Caldwell asked him if he knew what kind of dog Bella was. David paused. A small white dog. A Maltese, Caldwell said. Did you know your mother adopted Bella in 2013? I think so, David said. Did you ever meet Bella? David hesitated. I saw her when I visited. How many times did you visit between 2013 and 2023? David didn't have an answer. Caldwell let the silence hang in the air. On the 3rd day, Caldwell called Diane Harper to the stand. She was calm, measured, precise. She explained that she had known Eleanor for 12 years. They had met when Eleanor brought Bella to her clinic. Over time, they became friends. They had coffee once a week. They went to the botanical gardens. They talked. Did you ever ask Eleanor to put you in her will? Caldwell asked. No, Diane said. Did you ever suggest she leave money to Bella? No. Then why do you think she did it? Diane looked at the judge. Because she loved Bella, and because she knew Bella would be taken care of. That mattered to her. Greenberg cross-examined. He asked about the $75,000 salary. That's a lot of money, he said. It's a fair wage for full-time care, Diane replied. I live in the house. I manage all of Bella's needs. I keep records. I coordinate with the vet. I maintain the property. $75,000 is reasonable. But you benefit from this arrangement. I'm compensated for my work, Diane said. That's not the same as benefiting from Eleanor's death. Greenberg pressed harder. He asked if Diane had encouraged Eleanor to distance herself from her children. No, Diane said. Eleanor talked about them. She was disappointed they didn't visit more. But that was her feeling, not mine. Disappointed? Greenberg repeated. Yes. Did she say why? Diane hesitated. Tense aside, she felt they only cared about her money. The room went still. Greenberg tried to object, but Judge Brennan allowed it. What did she mean by that? Caldwell asked. Diane looked at Claire, David, and Margaret. Eleanor told me that every time they called, they asked about her finances. What she was spending, what she was saving, who she was leaving things to. They never asked how she was. They asked what she had. Claire stood up. That's a lie. Judge Brennan gavelled her down. Sit. Claire sat. Diane continued. Eleanor said she felt like an inheritance to them, not a mother. That's why she made the will. She wanted to make sure someone who actually cared about something she loved would benefit, not people who only cared about her money. Greenberg had no more questions. Judge Brennan recessed for the day. The next morning, she delivered her ruling. The will was valid. Eleanor Whitmore had been of sound mind when she executed it. There was no evidence of undue influence. The trust would stand. Claire, David, and Margaret lost. But the story didn't end there. After the ruling, Paul Greenberg advised the children that they could appeal. It would cost more money, take more time, and had a low probability of success. But it was an option. Claire wanted to appeal. David didn't. Margaret refused to participate any further. The family stopped speaking to each other. Claire blamed David for not fighting hard enough. David blamed Claire for dragging them into a lawsuit they couldn't win. Margaret blamed both of them for turning their mother's death into a spectacle. By March of 2024, none of them were on speaking terms. Meanwhile, Bella continued living in the house with Diane. She was 11 years old, healthy for her age, and well cared for. The trust paid for everything. Diane kept meticulous records. Every month, she submitted an accounting to Stephen Caldwell, who reviewed it and filed it with the court. The accounting showed exactly where the money went. Veterinary care, premium dog food, grooming, home maintenance, property taxes, Diane's salary. It was all documented, but the children didn't see it that way. To them, Bella was a symbol of their mother's rejection, a symbol of everything they had lost. Claire tried to move on. She threw herself into work, took on extra projects, stopped talking about the case, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. Late at night, she would replay the trial in her head. She would remember Diane's testimony. She would remember the look on the judge's face. She would remember the clause in the will. They know why. What did that mean? What did their mother think they had done? She called David in April. He didn't answer. She left a voicemail. He didn't call back. She drove to Margaret's house in May. Margaret's husband answered the door. He said Margaret didn't want to see her. Claire stood on the porch, staring at the closed door, and realized she had lost more than money. She had lost her family. In June, Claire hired a private investigator. She didn't tell anyone. She wanted to know if there was something they had missed, some piece of evidence that would prove Diane had manipulated their mother. The investigator spent 3 weeks digging. He found nothing. Diane Harper had no criminal record, no financial issues, no history of exploiting vulnerable people. She was exactly what she appeared to be. A retired veterinarian who had been friends with Eleanor Whit. The investigator's final report included one detail that stood out. In 2012, a year after Robert's death, Eleanor had gone to therapy. She had seen a psychologist named Dr. Linda Marsh for 6 months. The investigator couldn't access the records, but he confirmed the sessions had taken place. Claire called Dr. Marsh. She explained who she was, said she was trying to understand her mother's state of mind. Dr. Marsh was sympathetic but firm. She couldn't discuss a patient, even a deceased one, without a court order. Claire didn't pursue it, but the knowledge haunted her. What had her mother talked about in those sessions? What had she been feeling? What had driven her to therapy in the first place? Claire would never know. By the fall of 2024, Claire, David, and Margaret had each gone their separate ways. They didn't see each other at holidays. They didn't call. They didn't try to reconcile. Their mother's estate, worth $8.4 million, continued to fund the life of a small white dog. And in Eleanor's house, Diane Harper woke up every morning, fed Bella, took her for a walk, and followed the terms of the trust exactly as written. But there was one thing the children never found. One piece of the story that explained everything. In 2015, 2 years after adopting Bella, Eleanor had written a letter. She never sent it. She kept it in a drawer in her desk, tucked between old tax returns and receipts. Diane found the letter after the trial, while organizing Eleanor's papers. It was handwritten on plain stationery, undated, addressed to no one. It read, "I have spent the last 4 years alone. Robert is gone. My children are busy. They call when they need something. They visit when it's convenient. I do not blame them. They have their own lives, but I am not part of those lives. Bella is the only one who greets me when I come home. She is the only one who sits with me when I am sad. She does not ask for money. She does not ask what I plan to leave her. She simply loves me. I know what people will think. They will say, I have lost my mind. They will say I am one of those sad, lonely women who treats a dog like a child. Maybe I am, but I would rather leave my money to something that brings me joy than to people who see me as an obligation. If my children are angry, let them be angry. They will survive. They have careers, families, lives of their own. They do not need my money. They need nothing from me. Bella needs everything. That is the difference. Diane read the letter 3 times. Then she put it back in the drawer. She thought about giving it to the children. She thought it might help them understand. But she decided against it. Some truths, she realized, only make the pain worse. Bella died on March 14th, 2026. She was 13 years old. Diane was with her at the vet when it happened. It was peaceful. Bella simply stopped breathing. Diane cried for an hour. Then she called Stephen Caldwell and informed him that the trust's primary purpose had been fulfilled. Caldwell began the process of dissolving the trust and distributing the remaining assets to the animal welfare charities specified in Eleanor's will. The final accounting showed that over the course of Bella's care, the trust had spent approximately $1.7 million. Veterinary costs, home maintenance, property taxes, Diane's salary, and other expenses. The remaining $6.7 million was divided among 5 charities. Diane received a final payment of $30,000, covering her last months of work. Then she moved out of the house. She returned to her own home, a small cottage 20 minutes away, and resumed her quiet life. She never spoke to Claire, David, or Margaret again. The house was sold in May of 2026. It went for $1.9 million. The proceeds went to the charities. Claire learned about Bella's death from a notification sent by Caldwell's office. She read the email twice, then deleted it. She didn't tell David or Margaret. David found out a month later when he saw a news article about pet trusts. The article mentioned Eleanor's case as an example. He read it in his office during lunch, then closed the browser and went back to work. Margaret never found out. She had moved to Vermont with her husband and stopped following anything related to the estate. In the end, the inheritance destroyed the family exactly as Eleanor might have predicted. Claire lives alone in Boston. She is successful, financially secure, but estranged from her siblings. She thinks about her mother sometimes, but not often. It's easier not to. David lives in New Jersey with his wife and sons. He tells people his mother left her money to charity. He doesn't mention the dog. It's simpler that way. Margaret teaches 5th grade in a small town in Vermont. She doesn't talk about her family. When coworkers ask, she says her mother passed away a few years ago and changes the subject. None of them reconciled. None of them found peace with what happened, and none of them ever understood what Eleanor had been trying to tell them. That love is not an inheritance. It cannot be bought, demanded, or expected. It is given freely or not at all. Eleanor gave her love to Bella because Bella gave it back without condition. Her children had wanted her estate, but they had never wanted her. And in the end, Eleanor made sure they understood the difference. The house where Eleanor lived, where Bella slept on her bed, where Diane cared for them both, is now owned by a young couple with 2 children. They repainted the walls. They redid the kitchen. They planted new flowers in the garden. They have no idea what happened there. And perhaps that is for the best. Some stories are not meant to have happy endings. Some families are not meant to survive their secrets. Eleanor Whitmore's will was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of clarity. She saw her life as it truly was, and she made a choice. Whether that choice was right or wrong is not for anyone else to decide. but it was hers.